I was never wanted. Not in the way a child should be. My father had been waiting for a son, a strong boy to carry his name, to be his pride. But instead, he got me. And from the very beginning, I knew. Not because he ever said it outright. No, his silence spoke louder than words. There was no warmth in his eyes when he looked at me, only the cold recognition of a mistake he never corrected. Growing up in that house felt like living in someone else's shadow. My father was always there, but never really present. His approval was an impossible thing, always out of reach. He never raised a hand against me. He never needed to. His indifference was punishment enough. I could have disappeared, vanished into thin air, and I doubt he would have noticed or cared. My mother. She tried. In her own quiet way, she tried to be there, but she was just as much a prisoner as I was. I'd watch her shrink beneath his presence, her voice soft, her hands always busy, always moving as if keeping still would invite his anger. She loved me, I know she did, but love without strength is like a candle in the wind, flickering, fragile, easily snuffed out. So I tried to be enough for both of us. I studied harder than anyone else, earned the highest grades, collected achievements like armor, hoping, desperately, that he would see me, that he would be proud, that I could prove I was worth something. But no matter how many trophies lined my shelves, no matter how brightly I shined, I was still just a mistake in his eyes. I learned early that love had to be earned, that if I could be perfect, smart enough, polite enough, obedient enough, maybe, just maybe, I would become something more than just a disappointment. So I worked harder, studied longer, swallowed every word I wanted to say. I became the kind of daughter any father would be proud of. Any father but mine. Every report card I brought home, every award I won, I would hand to him with quiet hope gnawing at my chest. And every time, he barely looked at them. A nod, a grunt, sometimes not even that. It didn't matter how much I accomplished. In his eyes, I would always be lacking. He never said, "I'm proud of you." Never once. The only words he had for me were cold, cutting reminders that I wasn't what he wanted. But the worst part wasn't the rejection. It was the way I kept trying, knowing deep down that nothing would ever change, that I could break myself into pieces, shape myself into something new, and it still wouldn't be enough. That kind of pain is a quiet one, a slow burn, the kind that doesn't leave bruises but settles into your bones, making a home in your chest, a dull ache that never really goes away. And my mother. She saw it all. She saw the way I shrank under his gaze, the way I fought so hard for even a scrap of acknowledgement. But she was too afraid to stop it. Too afraid to fight for me when she couldn't even fight for herself. I think that hurt the most. Because if she couldn't love me loudly, if she couldn't protect me, then what chance did I ever have? There were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when I would catch myself wondering what it would feel like to be loved, to have a father who looked at me with warmth instead of disappointment, a mother who stood tall, unafraid, instead of bending under the weight of a man who barely saw her as more than an extension of his own failures. I would imagine it sometimes, just to see if it felt real. It never did. Instead, I learned to survive in the only way I could, by becoming invisible. If I stayed out of his way, if I made myself small enough, maybe he would forget I even existed. Some days, it worked. Other days, he would glance at me, eyes filled with something I could never quite name. Was it regret? Frustration? Resentment? I stopped trying to understand. What did it matter? The result was always the same. I told myself it didn't hurt, that I didn't care, that I was strong enough to not need his approval, his love, his acceptance. But I was lying. Of course I cared. Of course I wanted to be seen. No child grows up wanting to be invisible. And yet, that's exactly what I became. A shadow moving through hallways, a presence that could be ignored, erased, forgotten. And then one day, I stopped trying. I don't remember when exactly. Maybe it was the 100th time he looked right through me. Maybe it was the moment I realized my mother would never be able to save me. Or maybe deep down I always knew. There was no place for me in that house. Not really. And when the time came, I would leave it behind, just like he left me behind long ago. Grief doesn't feel the way people say it does. It's not just sadness, not just loss. It's a hollowing out, a slow erosion of everything you thought you knew. When my mother died, it wasn't just her I lost. It was the last fragile thread tying me to something soft, something human. And when she was gone, all that was left was him. I thought for a moment that maybe he would change. That losing her might shake something loose in him, force him to see me, even if just for a second. But when I looked at him, waiting for any sign of grief beyond his own selfish loss, all I saw was a man who had only ever loved one person. And it wasn't me. There was no warmth in his eyes, no grief that included me in its wake. He barely acknowledged my pain, barely looked at me at all. He mourned his wife, yes, but not as a man who had lost a partner. He mourned as a man who had lost something that belonged to him. And I was just the leftover, the afterthought, the unwanted reminder of a life he never chose. I stood there at her funeral, numb, the weight of it pressing down on my chest like a stone. People murmured their condolences, but none of it felt real. Nothing felt real. And when I turned to him, to the man who should have held me, comforted me, given me something, anything, I saw it in his face. The truth I had always known but never wanted to believe. I was alone, completely, utterly alone. The house felt different after she was gone. Emptier, colder, like even the walls had given up. My mother had been the only thing soft in that place, the only buffer between me and the man who barely acknowledged my existence. Without her, there was no one left to pretend. No one left to make it feel like a home. I moved through the days like a ghost, not speaking unless spoken to, not lingering in rooms where he sat. But even in silence, I could feel it, the final unraveling. He barely looked at me, barely spoke. And when he did, his voice was stripped of patience, as if my presence alone was a burden he no longer had to tolerate. Maybe without her, he finally felt free of the obligation to even pretend I mattered. At first, I thought I could bear it. I had spent a lifetime learning how to live unseen. But grief does something to you. It makes the things you once endured unbearable. It amplifies the quiet cruelty, turns indifference into something sharper, something that cuts deeper than words ever could. And every day, I felt it more. The weight of staying in a place where I was nothing. One night, as I sat alone in my room, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I didn't have to be here. I didn't have to keep waiting for a love that would never come, for a home that had never been mine. My mother had been the only reason I stayed, and now she was gone. There was nothing left for me here, and for the first time in my life, I understood. I could leave. I don't remember the exact moment I decided to go. Maybe it wasn't a moment at all, just a slow realization settling into my bones, an inevitability I had spent my whole life running from. But one night, as I lay in bed listening to the sound of my father moving around downstairs, it became clear. Staying meant continuing to shrink. Staying meant disappearing completely. So I packed. Not much. Just enough to fit in a single bag. Clothes, a few books, a photograph of my mother that I wasn't sure I could look at without breaking. I moved through the house quietly, like a thief stealing the only thing I had ever truly owned, myself. Every step felt surreal, like I was watching someone else do it, someone braver, someone who had finally stopped waiting to be wanted. I reached the front door and hesitated, my hand resting on the handle. Part of me thought he might stop me, that he might hear me, might look up and say something. Anything. But when I turned back, he was sitting in his chair, eyes fixed on the television, as if I wasn't even there. As if I had never been there at all. That was the moment I knew. He wouldn't chase after me. He wouldn't beg me to stay. He wouldn't even notice I was gone. And somehow, that made it easier. I stepped outside, feeling the night air hit my skin, the silence stretching out before me like a promise. I walked away without looking back, without regret, without fear, because for the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. Years passed. I built a life for myself, one that had nothing to do with him. At first, I didn't know who I was without the weight of his rejection pressing down on me. But little by little, I found out. I went to college, got a job, surrounded myself with people who saw me, really saw me. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was living. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But no matter how much distance I put between us, some wounds don't fade. They harden. They reshape you. I told myself I didn't care about him anymore, that I had left him behind like an old rotting shell, and maybe I even believed it. Until one day, out of nowhere, the past reached out to me in the form of a phone call. I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, but something inside me, some old instinct I thought I had buried, made me pick up. The voice on the other end was strained, weaker than I had ever heard it. "Victoria," he said, my name rough on his tongue, like it wasn't meant to be spoken after all these years. I froze. My father had never called me before, not once. For a moment, I thought it might be a mistake. But then he said the words I never expected to hear. "I need you." A slow, bitter cold spread through me as I realized what this was. Not love, not regret, just desperation. The man who had never once wanted me was now calling because he had no one else left. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch between us, heavy and unyielding, waiting to see if he would fill it. But he didn't. He just breathed on the other end, shallow and tired, as if even this small conversation was draining what little strength he had left. And maybe it was. "What do you want?" My voice came out colder than I expected, stripped of softness, stripped of the daughter he never raised. I didn't owe him warmth. I didn't owe him anything. He hesitated. Maybe he expected me to crumble at the sound of his voice, to slip back into the version of myself that used to beg for his approval. But that girl was gone. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sick," he admitted, his words slow, deliberate. "I don't have much time." There it was. No apologies. No acknowledgement of the years of silence. Just the simple, selfish truth. He needed me now, not because he missed me, not because he regretted what he had done, but because he had no one else. And in that moment, I realized something. I had spent my entire life chasing after the love of a man who was incapable of giving it. And now, the tables had turned. A part of me wanted to hang up, to let the silence swallow him the way he had once swallowed me, whole, forgotten, unworthy of a second thought. But I didn't. Not yet. Because as much as I hated it, as much as I wanted to believe I had erased him from my life, his voice still reached something buried deep inside me. A remnant of the girl who had once longed to be his daughter. "How is that my problem?" I finally asked, my tone flat, emotionless. I wanted him to feel what it was like to be nothing more than an inconvenience, to be spoken to like a burden. But he didn't lash out. He didn't argue. He just sighed, a sound that held more weight than I expected. "I have no one else," he admitted, and for the first time in my life, he sounded small. I should have felt satisfied. This was what he deserved, wasn't it? To be abandoned the way he had abandoned me, to feel the sting of loneliness, to understand what it was like to reach for someone and find nothing there. But instead of satisfaction, all I felt was something colder, something sharper. Because even now, after everything, he still wasn't saying what mattered. Not "I'm sorry," not "I was wrong," just "I need you." And that was when I knew I would go back, but not for him. Not for love, not for forgiveness, not for some fragile hope that this was a chance to finally be a daughter. No, I would go back on my terms, because for the first time in my life, I held the power, and I wanted him to feel it. The house looked smaller than I remembered. It had once been a place that swallowed me whole, walls pressing in, shadows stretching long into every corner. But now, standing at the door, I felt none of that. No fear, no weight on my chest. Just a quiet detachment, like I was stepping onto a stage where the script had already been written, and for the first time, I was the one holding the pen. I knocked, but there was no answer. Just a slow creak as the wind pushed against the aging wood, a reminder of how time had worn this place down, just like it had worn him down. I pushed the door open, stepping inside. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something stale, something decaying. A place abandoned long before the man inside it had begun to wither. And then, there he was, sitting in his old chair, the same one where he had spent years ignoring me. But now he looked fragile, shrunken, a ghost of the man who once towered over my childhood. His skin hung loose over his bones, his eyes sunken, his breathing shallow. He barely resembled the figure that had haunted my past, and for the first time, I realized he wasn't invincible. He never had been. He looked up at me, and for a fleeting second, something unreadable flickered across his face. Was it relief, regret, recognition? I didn't care. I stepped forward, my voice steady, devoid of hesitation. "You called for me," I said. Not Dad, not Father, just a statement of fact. He had summoned me like an afterthought, like a lifeline, like the last resort of a man who had spent his entire life pushing me away. For a moment, he just stared at me, his mouth slightly open as if words had failed him. Maybe they had. Maybe for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. Good. I wanted him to feel that, to sit in the same silence he had once weaponized against me. Finally, he swallowed, his voice hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "You came." I tilted my head slightly, watching him, measuring his words. "You came." Not "I'm glad you're here." Not "I'm sorry." Just an observation, as if I had appeared out of thin air, as if he couldn't quite believe I existed outside of the shadow he had cast over my childhood. "I did," I said, keeping my tone unreadable. I didn't step closer. I didn't offer comfort. I just let the weight of my presence settle into the space between us. He had spent years pretending I didn't matter, and now, here I was, the only person left. The irony of it sat heavy in the air, unspoken, but undeniable. He shifted, his frail body barely able to hold itself up. "I'm not well," he muttered, as if that explained everything, as if it excused everything. His voice cracked, but I felt nothing. No pang of sympathy, no urge to soothe his suffering. This was the man who had spent a lifetime erasing me, and now he wanted me to save him. I let his words hang in the air between us, watching as he shifted uncomfortably under the weight of my silence. He was waiting for something, a reaction, a flicker of sympathy, some sign that I still held the role of the obedient daughter he had never wanted but expected to remain loyal. But I gave him nothing. "You're not well," I echoed, my voice even. "And you think that means something to me?" His eyes flickered, just for a second, like he had expected me to be softer, expected time to have dulled the edges of what he had done. But I wasn't here to play into whatever story he had rewritten in his head. I was here to remind him of the truth. "You spent your whole life pretending I didn't exist." I stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, until there was barely any space between us. His breath hitched, but he didn't look away. "And now, after all these years, you want me to pretend it never happened? That we're suddenly father and daughter just because you need something from me?" His lips parted like he wanted to argue, but there was nothing to say. He had no defense, no justification. And for the first time, I saw it. The regret, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. Too little, too late. He had always been so sure that I would remain small, that I would always crave his approval, that I would come running the second he called. But he had miscalculated. I leaned in, my voice quiet but sharp. "Look at you now. The only person left to help you is the daughter you never wanted." He didn't speak, not right away. For the first time, he had no control over the narrative, no way to twist the moment into something that served him. He just sat there, small, defeated, his breathing shallow. I wondered if he had ever truly believed this day would come, the day where he would need me, where I would stand before him, unbroken, unbending. "I made mistakes," he finally rasped, his voice brittle with something that could have been remorse. But I wasn't here for half-hearted admissions, for vague acknowledgments wrapped in empty words. Mistakes are things you trip over, things you fix. What he had done wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, a lifetime of choices, each one reinforcing the same truth. I was never enough for him. I exhaled slowly, letting my gaze drift around the room. The house looked as worn as he did, hollowed out, rotting from the inside. It was strange how time had done to this place exactly what he had done to me. Ignored it, let it waste away, only realizing too late that neglect had consequences. So now what? I asked, tilting my head. Am I supposed to take care of you? Repay the years of silence with kindness? Be the good daughter, even though you were never a father? My voice didn't shake. Not anymore. I wasn't a scared little girl waiting for his approval. I was something he never expected me to become. Free. He closed his eyes for a moment, his face tight with exhaustion. Or maybe shame. I don't expect anything, he murmured. A lie. Of course he did. That's why he called me. That's why he sat there now, waiting, hoping that blood alone was enough to bind me to him. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. You don't expect anything? I repeated. Then why am I here? My voice was steady, but inside something twisted, something raw and old, something that had been waiting for this reckoning since the day I was born. He didn't answer. Maybe because he knew I was right. Maybe because he was too tired to fight. But I wanted an answer. I wanted him to say it, to admit it. To look me in the eye and acknowledge what he had done, not just now, in this moment of weakness, but always. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. Because to do that would mean admitting that all those years of cruelty, of indifference, weren't just mistakes, they were choices. And a man like him, a man who had spent his whole life believing he was right, didn't know how to face the weight of his own decisions. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching him struggle with whatever ghosts haunted him now. You don't deserve my help, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. And the worst part is, you know that. He flinched, just slightly, just enough for me to see it. And for the first time in my life, I saw something I had never seen in him before. Not anger, not resentment, not cold indifference. Just a man, weak and aging, realizing too late that the bridge he had burned could never be rebuilt. For a brief second, I wondered if this was what I had always wanted, to see him like this, to hold the power he had once used to make me feel so small. But standing here, watching him wither under the weight of his own regret, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel satisfied. I just felt done. I should go, I said, pushing off the wall. The words felt light, effortless, because they weren't burdened with hesitation. There was nothing left to be said, nothing left to salvage. He had been given a lifetime of chances to be a father, and he had thrown them all away. And now, I was giving myself permission to do what he never could. I was walking away, fully and completely. I turned toward the door, stepping past him without looking back. He didn't call my name. He didn't ask me to stay. Maybe he finally understood that there was nothing he could say to undo what had been done. And as I stepped outside into the open air, I felt something I had never felt before. Not just freedom, not just closure. Peace.